Today we look at the question of why the most technologically advanced military in human history is structurally incapable of winning a conflict against a country with roughly 1/50th of its defense budget. And the answer has nothing to do with courage, nothing to do with willpower, nothing to do with who is right. It has to do with mathematics. Pure, cold, indifferent mathematics. Here is the thesis. The United States' technological superiority, the thing CNN and Fox News celebrate every single night with their missile cam footage and their aircraft carrier beauty shots, is not an asset. It is a liability. It is the single biggest structural disadvantage the United States carries into this conflict. And if that sounds counterintuitive to you, good. Because that means you've been consuming the mainstream narrative. And the mainstream narrative is, to put it academically, stupid. You have been lied to. Not maliciously, necessarily, but structurally. The incentives of American media are to make you feel like you are winning. The math says otherwise, okay? So let me walk you through 3 mechanisms. 3 games being played simultaneously. And by the end, you will understand why Iran does not need to defeat the United States military. It never did. That was never the game. The game is something else entirely, and Washington either doesn't see it or can't admit it. Does that make sense? Good. Let's begin. Mechanism 1, the precision strike illusion. Let me give you a number. A single Patriot interceptor missile costs somewhere in the range of $4 million. Some estimates put certain configurations closer to 6. Now, let me give you another number. A Shahed 136 drone, the kind Iran mass produces and distributes to its proxies, costs somewhere between $20,000 and $50,000. Some analysts estimate even less. Now, you do not need a PhD in mathematics to understand what happens next. When you fire a $4 million missile at a $20,000 drone, and you do this 100 times, who won? You intercepted the drone. Congratulations. You are now $400 million poorer, and your opponent has spent maybe $2 million, maybe $5 million, if we are being generous. The exchange ratio is roughly 80-1. In some scenarios, worse, okay? This is what I call the multiplication trap. The United States military is designed around multiplication. You multiply force through technology. You build a $2 billion stealth bomber, so one aircraft can do the work of 50. You build a $13 billion aircraft carrier, so you can project power across an ocean. Multiplication. And in a conventional war, a 20th century war, against another state with tanks and jets and a symmetric order of battle, multiplication wins. It is the dominant strategy, but Iran is not playing a multiplication game. Iran is playing a subtraction game. Every drone it launches, whether it hits or misses, subtracts from the American treasury. Every proxy rocket, every sea mine in the Strait of Hormuz, every cheap ballistic missile that forces an Aegis destroyer to light off a $30 million salvo of SM-6 interceptor subtraction. The cost is always asymmetric. Always. And this is not a bug in Iran's strategy. It is the strategy. Does that make sense? Think of it this way. In game theory, we distinguish between games of annihilation and games of exhaustion. A game of annihilation is what America prepares for. Shock and awe. Destroy the enemy's capacity. But a game of exhaustion is different. You don't need to destroy the opponent's capacity. You need to make the cost of using that capacity unsustainable. Iran cannot destroy a carrier strike group. But if it can make operating that carrier strike group in the Persian Gulf cost $3 billion a month in defensive expenditures alone, it doesn't need to sink the carrier. The carrier sinks itself financially, right? And here is the part no one in Washington wants to say out loud. You cannot solve this with more technology. More technology means more cost. More cost means the exchange ratio gets worse, not better. The asymmetric advantage compounds. Every upgrade America makes to its defense systems is a gift to Iran's strategy, okay? Let that settle for a moment. Mechanism 2, the petrodollar chokehold. Now we move to the real game. Because the drone versus missile math, as devastating as it is only the surface layer. The deeper game is economic, and it targets something far more fragile than a military base. It targets the financial architecture that allows the United States to fund its military in the first place. Let me explain the structure. The United States dollar maintains its status as the global reserve currency in large part because of one agreement, the petrodollar arrangement. Oil is priced and traded in dollars. Gulf Cooperation Council states Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain, Oman sell their oil in dollars and recycle those dollars back into U.S. Treasury bonds and American financial instruments. This is the loop. This is the engine. Without this loop, the United States cannot run the deficits it runs. It cannot finance the military it finances. It cannot maintain the imperial structure it maintains. Okay? This is not opinion. This is plumbing. This is how the system works. Now, Iran's proxies, Hezbollah, the Houthis, various militia networks in Iraq and Syria, where are they positioned? Look at a map. They are positioned around the economic infrastructure of the Gulf states. The Houthis sit on the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. They have demonstrated, not theorized, demonstrated the ability to disrupt commercial shipping in the Red Sea. That is 12 to 15% of global trade flowing through that choke point. Hezbollah sits on Israel's northern border, yes, but its strategic value to Iran is deterrence. It is a card Iran holds to prevent a full coalition from forming. The Iraqi militias sit within rocket range of Gulf state oil infrastructure. Do you see the geometry? Iran has built a ring not around American bases, although those are inside the ring too, but around the wealth extraction infrastructure that funds the American system. The real target is not the Fifth Fleet. The real target is Saudi Aramco's processing facilities. The real target is the confidence of international shipping insurers. The real target is the risk premium on Gulf oil. In 2019, a drone and cruise missile attack struck the Abqaiq processing facility in Saudi Arabia. It temporarily knocked out roughly 5% of global oil supply. Oil prices spiked nearly 15% overnight. That attack cost Iran or its proxies perhaps a few $100,000. The economic disruption was measured in billions. That is the exchange ratio Iran cares about, not military, economic. And here is the systemic trap. If the Gulf states begin to feel that America cannot protect their infrastructure, and some of them are already feeling this, they begin to hedge. They begin to diversify. They begin accepting yuan for oil. They begin deepening relationships with Beijing. Every inch they move away from the dollar is an inch of structural advantage lost for the United States. And this movement does not require a war. It requires doubt. Iran does not need to win a war. It needs to create doubt. Does that make sense? The Nash equilibrium here is fascinating and deeply unfavorable for the US. If America escalates militarily, it increases the cost and the risk to Gulf infrastructure, which accelerates the hedging behavior it is trying to prevent. If America does nothing, it projects weakness, which also accelerates the hedging. There is no clean move. That is the definition of a systemic trap, right? Mechanism 3, the political attrition trap. And now the third game, which is perhaps the most elegant from a pure strategy perspective. The United States operates on a 4-year political cycle. Every 4 years, the entire strategic calculus resets. A new president enters, new advisors, new priorities, new political debts to pay. The institutional memory is shallow. The incentive structure is short-term. A president needs to show results before the midterms, needs to position for re-election, needs to manage domestic narratives. War is popular for about 6 weeks. After that, it becomes a political liability. We have data on this. Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan. The pattern is consistent. Initial support, erosion, fatigue, withdrawal. The timeline compresses with each conflict because the media cycle accelerates, okay? Iran's leadership structure is fundamentally different. The supreme leader is not elected in a competitive democratic sense. The IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, operates on institutional timelines, not electoral ones. Their planning horizon is not 4 years, it is 20, 30. They watched the United States enter Iraq in 2003, and they began positioning for the aftermath before the first tank crossed the border. They built militia networks, they cultivated political clients, they played the long subtraction game while America played the short multiplication game. And 20 years later, who has more influence in Baghdad? Be honest with yourself, right? This is the time asymmetry, and it is almost impossible to overcome in a democratic system. Not because democracy is weak, but because democracy optimizes for different variables. It optimizes for responsiveness to the electorate, and the electorate does not want a 40-year strategic commitment in the Middle East. The electorate wants gas prices to stay low and their children to come home. These are rational preferences, but they create a structural advantage for any opponent willing to wait. Iran knows this. They have studied it. The entire doctrine of strategic patience is built on one insight. Americans will leave. They always leave, not because they are defeated, because the political cost of staying exceeds the political will to remain. And every dollar spent, every deployment extended, every news cycle dominated by Middle Eastern conflict brings that departure closer. So Iran's optimal strategy is not to fight. It is to create the conditions under which fighting becomes perpetually expensive, perpetually inconclusive, and perpetually politically toxic. It is to sit inside America's decision cycle and wait for the cycle to do the work. That is not weakness. From a game theory perspective, that is one of the most efficient strategies available to a weaker player facing a stronger opponent. You do not outfight the stronger player. You outlast them. You make the game itself the weapon. Does that make sense? So, let me summarize what we have established. Mechanism 1. The cost-exchange ratio of modern asymmetric warfare is catastrophically unfavorable to the technologically superior side. Every interception is a mathematical loss. The more America defends, the more it bleeds. Mechanism 2. Iran's proxy architecture is positioned not around military targets, but around the economic infrastructure that sustains the dollar system. The real war is not kinetic, it is financial. And doubt is the only weapon required. Mechanism 3. The time horizon mismatch between a 4-year democratic cycle and a multi-decade institutional strategy creates a structural advantage that no amount of military spending can overcome. 3 mechanisms, 3 games, and in none of them does Iran need to win a single conventional battle. The United States is playing chess. Iran is playing a completely different game, one where the objective is not checkmate, but to make your opponent spend so much energy on each move that they eventually forfeit. Now, does this mean Iran wins? Not necessarily. Iran has its own fragilities. Its economy is under severe pressure. Its domestic population is restless. Sanctioned states are brittle in ways that do not always show up in strategic models. But the point is not that Iran is strong. The point is that the game it has chosen to play, the asymmetric, long-duration, economic attrition game, is one in which America's conventional advantages do not translate. Strength becomes weight. Technology becomes cost. Political responsiveness becomes strategic impatience. And until someone in Washington is willing to say that out loud, to admit that the structure of the game itself is the problem, not the opponent, nothing changes. The math does not care about your aircraft carriers. The math does not care about your elections. The math simply is. That is the lecture. If you found it useful, you may subscribe.